How could just 300 men defeat an army of thousands? This is the story of Gideon, a man who began in fear but rose in faith when God called him, mighty warrior. Judges 7:7, with the 300 men, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let's journey into one of the most astonishing battles in the Bible. Welcome to Bible Stories with UG, where timeless stories of faith come alive in powerful ways. If you love inspiring biblical stories that strengthen your faith, make sure to subscribe and join our growing family. Gideon's story begins in Judges 6:12-14, a time of deep despair. The Midianites had overrun Israel, destroying crops and leaving the people starving. Terrified, Gideon hid in a winepress, threshing wheat in secret so it wouldn't be stolen. But in that hidden place of fear, heaven broke in. An angel of the Lord appeared, declaring words that seemed impossible. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon looked around in shock. Mighty warrior. He felt anything but strong. He doubted, questioned, even argued. But God saw more in Gideon than Gideon saw in himself. Still, Gideon's heart trembled. Could this really be God's voice? He prepared an offering, meat and bread on a stone, and waited. Then suddenly, the angel touched it with his staff. Fire flared up from the rock, consuming everything before Gideon's eyes. Overwhelmed, he fell to the ground, realizing he had seen the messenger of God. But faith requires action. That night, God gave Gideon a dangerous command. Tear down the altar of Baal in his village. With trembling hands and a few servants, Gideon obeyed under cover of darkness. By morning, the town was furious, demanding his life. Yet, instead of death, Gideon's boldness ignited courage. God was clearly with him. Even so, Gideon longed for assurance. He laid out a fleece of wool, asking God for a sign, dew only on the fleece, dry ground all around. The next morning, the fleece was soaked. Still uncertain, he asked again, but this time, let the fleece be dry and the ground wet. And God answered, patiently confirming his promise. With courage renewed, Gideon summoned an army. Thousands of men came, ready to fight. But God whispered a startling command. You have too many men. One by one, the army was reduced. First the fearful were sent home, then those who drank water carelessly. Finally, only 300 remained. 300 men against a vast army that covered the valley like locusts. Could victory still be possible? That night, God sent Gideon into the enemy's camp. In the shadows, he overheard two Midianite soldiers speaking. One told of a dream, of a barley loaf tumbling into camp and knocking down a tent. His comrade replied, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon. God has given Midian into his hands. Judges 7:22. Hope surged in Gideon's heart. He bowed in worship, knowing God had already secured the victory. At midnight, the moment came. Gideon divided his men into 3 groups. Each carried a trumpet, a torch hidden inside a clay jar, and no sword in hand. At the signal, they blew the trumpets, smashed the jars, and shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Torches blazed in the night. Trumpets thundered across the valley. The Midianite camp erupted in chaos. Confused and terrified, the enemy soldiers turned their swords on each other. Panic spread like wildfire, and the mighty army scattered in defeat. Gideon and his 300 pursued them, driving out the oppressors. Against all odds, the impossible had happened. God had delivered his people with a handful of faithful men and a leader who finally believed. The story of Gideon is a reminder for us today. God does not need numbers, strength, or status to bring victory. He looks for willing hearts, even trembling ones, and transforms them into mighty warriors. If he could use Gideon, he can use you. With God, even the smallest army can overcome the greatest enemy. Here are 16 rich lessons from the story of Gideon. 1. God sees potential in us even when we see weakness. When Gideon called himself the least of his family, God still addressed him as mighty warrior. 2. God's presence matters more than personal strength. Victory was not about Gideon's ability but about God being with him. 3. Obedience often begins in small steps. Before leading an army, Gideon first tore down the altar of Baal at home. 4. Faith sometimes grows through reassurance. God patiently confirmed his word to Gideon with signs, showing he understands our doubts. 5. God's power is perfected in weakness. 300 men defeated thousands, so no one could boast in human strength. 6. True courage is not the absence of fear, but obedience despite it. Gideon often felt afraid, but he still acted on God's command. 7. God uses unlikely people for extraordinary purposes. The least in his clan became Israel's deliverer. 8. Worship strengthens faith. When Gideon heard the enemy's dream, he bowed in worship before going into battle. 9. God may reduce our resources to increase our dependence on him. The shrinking of Gideon's army reminds us not to rely on numbers or resources. 10. Spiritual victory requires unity and strategy. The 300 men acted together, blowing trumpets, smashing jars, and shouting in one voice. 11. Sometimes our greatest battles are won without swords. The Midianites turned on themselves. God fought for Israel. 12. Public boldness often begins in private faith. Gideon's nighttime act of tearing down the altar prepared him for leading openly. 13. God's word is more trustworthy than fear. Though Gideon was hesitant, every promise God made came true. 14. Victory belongs to the Lord, not to us. Israel's triumph was not because of Gideon's strategy but because God intervened. 15. Faith inspires others to follow. Though Gideon began in doubt, his obedience gave courage to his men. 16. God turns ordinary people into mighty warriors. The story of Gideon assures us that God can use anyone willing to trust and obey him. Thank you for watching Bible Stories with UG. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful Bible stories that strengthen faith. And check the description below for Christian resources that will help you grow deeper in God's Word. See you in the next story.